Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into today's webinar. I'm Nicholas Tan, Senior Marketing Specialist for APAC from LogRhythm, and today we're talking about the exfiltrated files, how to reduce insider risks to your organization. We've previously talked about this topic through a more technical lens on how you can detect and prevent insider threats with the LogRhythm SIEM. You'll be able to find the link to that on the attachment section of the webinar below. Now back to today's presentation, we're joined by Joanne Wong, VP of International Marketing from LogRhythm, and she'll be talking about insider threats, its impact to business, and how to reduce this risk from a business operations angle. Joanne, the space is yours.
Thanks, Nicholas. So today we are covering a topic which is highly relevant to all organizations. Data is king, and protection of confidential data is a priority for all businesses. And yet we continue to read about cases involving data theft and exfiltration. So we'll cover how employee attrition, both voluntary and involuntary, is impacting businesses. Most importantly, how can we protect our data through effective cybersecurity practices and the use of tools in light of the Great Resignation and more recently, the mass global layoffs? So a data breach often results in data exfiltration, where an organization's data is copied, transferred, or retrieved from a computer or server without authorization. This act is not only carried out by bad actors, but also employees, vendors, contractors, also known as insiders. And this can be done either maliciously or inadvertently. According to the most recent Ponemon study, insider threats have risen 44%, accounting for nearly 35% of all unauthorized access threats incidents. What has contributed to this sharp increase? Can we blame it all on COVID-19? We can, but we all know that the pandemic is only a catalyst. The rapid changes COVID-19 pandemic brought about only heightened the risk of data exfiltration. So let's take a look at these underlying changes. Remote working is not a new phenomenon. We've had digital nomads and remote workers move to places like Bali even before COVID-19 forced everyone to work remotely. And when the pandemic hit, this style of work became more widely adopted as we found ourselves in lockdowns that dragged on for months. Some of us, unfortunately, who were not able to relocate, had to reorganize our homes to create a proper workspace. As can see in this picture, in Singapore, where space is constrained, some of us found ourselves sharing our workspace with our children, carrying their home-based learning program during the lockdown. So with 56% of employees demanding flexible work arrangements, many companies have adopted a hybrid work model to hire and retain talents. Speaking of hiring and retaining talents, one of the events that have plagued businesses is the Great Resignation. What started in the US has now rippled across the globe. PwC reported that 20% of workers they spoke to last year plan to quit their jobs. Closer to home, 73% of Singapore workers were planning to quit. That number is simply staggering. What do these numbers mean then for businesses? Whether it's the mass resignation or layoffs, they both have significant fallout when it comes to IT security. Departing staff are taking with them copies of valuable and sensitive data. And regardless of the motivations, insider threats are increasing at an alarming rate. Remote access with privileged users are able to access infrastructure and potentially cause harm. Again, with remote or hybrid work, we see users being able to cause mischief remotely, like extracting important files. So in the case of more direct harm, they could also undermine controls like a water treatment plant system. With non-secure behavior, we see employees getting on unsecured Wi-Fi connections as more work away from the office. They could be working, or taking calls from coffee shops, libraries, or the nearest mall. And with work life seeping into personal space, users may let their guard down and by being less alert, fall prey to phishing. In the case of dissatisfied employees or even contractors with access, they are at risk of being recruited into ransomware groups like Lepsis. On the right is an image of a standard job ad put up by this ransomware group. It was not on the dark web, but in plain sight on their Telegram channel. A data breach is bad for business. More than that, with the tightening of data protection in most jurisdictions, the loss of client data is met with serious fines, not to mention a blemish to the company's brand and reputation. Businesses faced with cyber threats are finding that they can be a challenge to prevent. Detecting data theft by an employee is difficult because it closely resembles a legitimate business activity. And with the increased use of cloud platforms and work from home patterns, this becomes a bigger headache for businesses. Analytical methods and observational vantage points provide the best possible detection posture. Putting automated tools in place can also increase the likelihood that data theft will be spotted, and employees then question about those innocuous activity. One of the most prevalent ways used by departing staff to steal company data is to transfer it via personal email account to a web storage service such as Google Drive or Dropbox. In these instances, a security information and event management tool, SIEM for short, can be used to monitor email activity and spark alerts when anomalous events are spotted. And when choosing a SIEM, the right tool ought to help you reduce the noise, and this refers to false positives and negatives. It helps you prioritize work for your lean security teams, and lastly, is effective in securing your environment. For a more technical walkthrough of how SIEM or Network Detection and Response Tool, NDR, or a UEBA tool, a User Entity Analytics tool, can help, please check our webinar on the great exfiltration, employees leave and take the keys. So to summarize, I will leave you with 3 points. Data exfiltration is a real threat, with its risk magnified by developments in remote working, the Great Resignation, and most recently, the mass global layoffs. Invest in process and technologies that can help you detect and respond to insider threats rapidly to avoid significant damage to your company. Lastly, pay attention to the people aspect as well. Ensure staff have sufficient cybersecurity awareness and training to avoid attacks like phishing and social engineering. Other factors, such as employee satisfaction and engagement, should also be examined for any improvements.
All right. Thank you, Joanne, for your insightful presentation. I think you made some very salient points during that as well. Now, aside from the technology, being able to identify insider threats, from the presentation, I think we've seen that companies should also look into the people and the processes and build what they call, the human firewall. So I guess now before we end the session, we do have a bit of time for a discussion. And we have a question here, asking your thoughts on organizations needing to build up the defenses holistically or more holistically, as we're looking at less fail-safes being available in the event of a successful attack or breach. Now, I guess this is in relation to a recent interview with the CEO of Zurich, right, who mentioned that, cyber threats will become uninsurable because the risk is just expanding, hospitals, pipelines, and government's department being disrupted. A lot of things are at stake as well. So I just wanted to check, what are your thoughts on it?
Sure, thanks, Nick. So businesses have been insuring against their business risk, right? That's part and parcel of doing business. While the statement that the CEO of Zurich made was somewhat controversial, this is how insurance has worked for other risks. Organizations that have fallen victim to cyber attacks would find themselves being hit potentially with exclusions or even increased insurance premiums. This doesn't just happen in cyber. We see it in health, in motor, and fire insurance. So on building a defense holistically, the answer is an absolute yes, no doubt about it. We often emphasize that it's not just one single factor or a silver bullet, but a healthy combination of people, process, and technology, aiding the organization to achieve cybersecurity maturity. So as mentioned earlier, technologies like SIEM, NDR, and UEBA can really help us gain observability through the network and endpoints. And they are absolutely integral in improving our ability to detect and mitigate threats in a timely manner. In fact, we often don't realize this, but an attack doesn't just happen without warning. Very often, there is warnings of an initial breach that occurs. And if we don't detect it fast enough before the hackers sell the access or exploit, we'll then be facing the full-on breach that gets reported all the time. So it's important to leverage technology to help with that. And that can give your company, a higher success with security. At the same time, the people and processes are equally important. Like in the presentation earlier, if we can identify and stop attempts to compromise at the phishing phase, or even stop users from being motivated to harm the organization, there would be a lot less work required to detect and remediate any potential threats.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Having, both the technologies as well as detection tools, along with the highly engaged and happy staff that also have high security awareness, organizations would be able to lessen the work needed for any possible remediation or recovery. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I guess that's all the time we have for today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email us or connect with us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you again, and thank you to Joanne for sharing, and thank you to everyone who's joined us for today. We hope to see you again for our future webinar sessions. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.